Hi, I'm Mark Kuban, publisher of industry magazine Inside Film.
I'm Jackie Keast, the editor of Inside Film.
We're self-appointed experts in content and in making each other laugh.
Welcome to our podcast on Tools, where we recommend things you should watch, listen to, read, or scroll through. This week, we're going to talk about podcast The Last Days of August,
Documentary The Raincoat Killer, the book Crushing It,
and YouTube channel Pastor Grannies.
Ooh. Hump day. Yeah. On the tools. Hey,
We're here again.
we're here again, fourth ep. Very excited. How's your week been?
Long, wet, boring. Are you?
Has been. The same. I'm looking forward to the holidays. They're just around the corner, so we're kind of on the home stretch. Are you going away?
Well, as I mentioned in the previous episode, my parents have bought a farm. So, well, it's not really a farm, a property. So I'll be up there riding on the ride-on lawnmower with an Kuban hat on. What about you?
I think I'm just going to stay in the city. I don't mind it when everyone leaves.
It's nice. It's quiet.
Yeah, it's good.
I hate now that this COVID is over. There's traffic everywhere. I'm not used to it.
And now we have places to be, people to see.
Yeah.
And obligations.
I don't like it. I want to go back to the safe cocoon of before.
That's, I'm the same. So what have you been listening to?
I thought I would talk about a podcast called The Last Days of August, which it's the only podcast I've listened to twice. And I don't know why I listened to it twice, but I did enough because I found it so moving. So it's created and hosted by the British journalist John Ronson, who you might know from like books like The Men Who Stare at Goats and The Psychopath Test. He's hosted a few TV shows as well. But basically, it's an investigation into the death of Canadian porn star August Ames, who took her own life in 2017 when she was 23. And Ronson previously made a podcast called The Butterfly Effect, also with Audible, which I've also listened to, which is about, I guess, about how the internet changed the porn industry. So it starts with an interview with the guy who created Pornhub. And so Ronson is pretty tuned into the porn world in the US. And he's also written a book that's called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, who basically he talks to people who've been cancelled on social media and the impact that that has on their lives moving forward.
What do you mean cancelled on social media?
You know, like basically, okay, they use the example of the woman who tweeted, she's in the book. She tweeted something saying, "I'm going to South Africa, lol, hope I don't get AIDS," and put that on her Twitter to her 250 followers. When she turn on her phone again in the 14 hours or however long the flight to Johannesburg was, she was in news headlines. She'd lost her job. Basically what an ignorant comment, but her life was completely ruined. And obviously if you Google her name, that comes up forever. So he talks to her. He talks to Monica Lewinsky in the book about what would have happened to her if that stuff happened now. He talks to a journalist who writes, I think it's an autobiography of Bob Dylan, and makes quotes up and basically gets discovered and about what happens to his life from there.
What do you mean he makes quotes? He steals quotes?
He makes up things that Bob Dylan never said. It's like one quote. The rest of it is real, but for some reason he made up this one sort of meaningless quote, and this mega fan of Bob Dylan goes crazy and cross-references it and can't find it anywhere, and basically pulls apart this book, which I think there was a few more quotes, but basically he made things up. There's another girl who she makes fun of a statue in the US, like a military statue, and she is all these people that are offended by her doing this, and like veterans and things. And so she loses her job as well with disabled children, and Bronson sits with her, and basically she works with this company to try to, if you Google her name, to try to make that not come up. So they build this new profile for her, which apparently happens for celebrities. So if you say something problematic, I guess they can erase it from Google. But
Really?
it costs a lot of money, but this girl did it because Ronson was exploring it. And so they did it as a test. So they created like blogs for her where she talked about cats and dogs and like silly things in the internet, so that like with high SEO, so that the things about her making fun of these military statues were pushed down. But yeah, it's an interesting book. But in terms of this going back to the last days of August, I guess because he's looked at this sort of thing about how social media can impact people's lives, sort of makes him the perfect, and he's investigated the porn world, it sort of makes him the perfect person to look at Ames's death, because on the surface, she seemed to commit suicide after she was sort of subject to this sort of Twitter pile-on. So basically, Ames said that she didn't want to work with male performers who had also had sex with men on Twitter. And she got this huge backlash. She's bisexual herself, but then she got all these accusations that she was homophobic, including from lots of senior members of the porn industry. This includes like a pansexual performer telling her the world is waiting for your apology or for you to swallow a cyanide pill. And then 2 days later, she was dead. So
Wow.
Her husband, who also works in porn as like a director producer, released this public statement saying like this bullying took her life, and a big public letter. And this causes this stir within the industry because, Ronson goes and interviews people that said some of these comments to her, and like one woman breaks down in tears because she thought what she said was wrong, but she never intended for that to hurt Ames or to hurt August. So anyway, like Ronson, initially he starts to think that this will be like a really sort of straightforward story into social media, but then as he talks to more and more people that know August, you start to get a more complete portrait of what was happening to her in the lead up to her death. Particularly learn more about Kevin, her husband, who was a lot older than her. And, he's sort of all over the place. Like he's very emotional, obviously, about her dying, but you get the sense that he was very controlling, and he acted really strangely because she went missing before she was found dead. And he acted really strangely during that time where she was missing. And you find out he's had 2 previous marriages that also sort of ended badly for the women involved. And you start to sort of draw these kind of questions marks around him, even though you also sort of hear that he's grieving, really. But you start to wonder early on whether her death is really a suicide. But like Ronson sort of says straight up early on that this podcast it's not a murder mystery, and he sort of snuffs that out. It's not a true crime podcast. So, but what it sort of ends up actually being is sort of a portrait of August, and it raises a lot of questions about mental health and the Me Too movement, and I guess what it means to be believed and to also be heard. Like August was sexually abused when she was a child, and she talked about that through her career, and like I guess things happened to her on porn sets that are sort of mishandled or like that she was not comfortable with, and then she talks to people she trusts, and they don't take it as seriously as they could have. It's not an easy listen, but I guess it succeeds because Ronson and his producer, Lena Mestitzis, they handle the story with lots of care. Like it's not sensationalized. Everyone they speak to with real humanity, and it doesn't lean into stereotypes about the porn industry at all. Like, and it doesn't put forward that her story is like representative of the porn industry itself. And you also hear them sort of grappling with the ethical decisions that they're making, some of the interviews that they do, and dragging up things from people's past, like Kevin's past, and how, as journalists, that they have to, like, how difficult it can be to deal with some of this subject matter. But yeah, so it's about 7 episodes, each is 30 minutes, and you can listen to it pretty quickly. It's really good. It's a few years old, so it makes you wonder. Like, I think the porn industry is probably one of those industries that's changed a lot in COVID. We weren't able to touch each other, so then you see the rise of platforms like OnlyFans, and I guess
that's a question itself, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's almost like the commercialization of independent porn, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, and I guess there's an argument that porn and OnlyFans sort of puts it can be empowering for sex workers. Suddenly they're in control of their own career, which, in some of the Butterfly Effect podcasts, you could tell that you weren't necessarily in control of your own career. But I do wonder, is that simplistic? I follow, I feel like we're always talking about sex on this podcast so far, but there is a sex worker that I follow on Instagram called Tilly Lawless. And I think she wrote about it in The Guardian as well, but she started an OnlyFans during the first COVID lockdown, and she said that it made her hate masturbation. And I think...
Well, if that's all you're doing.
Exactly. And I think I can imagine being on one of those platforms. It's like, even though you do have control over your output, you are suddenly these people can contact you all the time. They want to have a certain experience with you, and you sort of need to be available to them. I don't know how much of that is on your own terms, but yeah.
But also what happens, if you're younger, maybe naive, can you erase your past, or will it come with you? I mean, it's a really...
Well, that's even not just for sex workers. It's like, there's once you take a nude, you might as well be ready to share that nude with the whole world. Because you don't, hopefully you send it to people you trust, but that person can send it and forward it on to anyone. So yeah, I don't know. Just
anyway, I might set up my own, only. I'll have all of 2 fans.
The solution is to only take nudes of yourself that you think are hot.
Well,
I'd be proud.
That eliminates that.
But I also think
every photo.
No, I think some of the stigma around that is going away. But then you do wonder about kids and having access to phones. And I thank the world that there were no phones with cameras when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Or social media.
All you need is headphones.
I've been reading a book, Crushing It, by Gary Vaynerchuk. It's kind of more a work read, really, but Gary's written several books, including bestseller Crush It and The Thank You Economy. He's an entrepreneur and venture capitalist, and he's built a fairly successful business around his personal brand, and regarded as a wizard of social and digital media. For me as a publisher, and probably true for most content creators, is that I'm always looking for cut through. And you know as well, Jackie, I guess, with the website, when we're looking at how to retain and grow audiences and audience insights.
I don't want people to know how addicted I am to watching Google Analytics.
But, insights like what they like to read, where they like to hang out when visiting our sites, how they consume our content, what technology they use to access our content, their social media preferences, and whether other articles or mastheads might be of interest to them. And also where they go when they leave our sites.
I don't know whether most people would be aware about how much actually information you can track on people, it's quite in-depth what you can gather through these analytics.
Well, it is very in-depth. But, the relationship, and Gary kind of highlights that in his previous book, that, social media has kind of changed the relationship between organizations and customers, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can almost have that one-on-one experience. But in his book, and look, while most of the topics he covers are familiar, right, to me, he does make some interesting points and highlights, especially over the last 20 years, that the landscape has changed a lot. And look, I hate using the term disruption because it's just really another word for change. But he highlights that the old checks and balances have been removed. And by that, he refers to, that once upon a time, if you wanted to be discovered as an actor, you'd maybe need to move to Hollywood. Or if you wanted to become a filmmaker, you'd start by making short films. Or if your ambition was television or radio, you'd probably start your career at a regional broadcaster. And for musicians, wanting to get signed, you'd get on the live band circuit and send demos to A&R executives and record companies hoping for a deal. And in his book, he talks about the internet and social media essentially doing away with industry gatekeepers and giving creatives and artists unparalleled opportunity to communicate directly with potential audiences and exploit their followers. And, of course, that doesn't mean that you'd be a great actor or a musician, as we've discovered. So anyway, it was kind of interesting. And I thought it was interesting because marketing is something that goes hand in hand with most creative endeavors. And some of these content creators on social media have phenomenal numbers of followers. So out of curiosity, I spent, I think, last weekend examining some of the big names in social media, and the numbers are simply staggering. I guess one of the people that sort of stuck out for me is a TikToker by the name of Bella Porch. She was originally from the Philippines. Her shtick, besides being cute in a weird anime way, is basically she's just good at being cute. Kind of makes her face do weird things, and, she's like it's weird. It's like an anime character, but she's got 800,000 Twitter followers, more than 14 million Instagram followers, and over 84 million TikTok followers. And the TikTok likes are approaching 1.9 billion. And this all happened very quickly, I think, since the beginning of 2020. So I kind of followed her and, had a look at her trajectory. I think she's just been signed to an agency in New York, and it appears that the managers are now attempting to morph her into a more vampy persona. She's released several music tracks, and look, she can sing. They're obviously overly produced. The film clips they appeared big budget. I think there was some kind of deal with Warner Music Group. But interestingly, with all those numbers, they haven't performed as well as you might have thought they would. And so she kind of, I think, sort of got to the mid-20s of the Billboard charts. And I don't know, it doesn't, I was having a look at how many likes she got. It was interesting. And one of the things that Gary mentions in his book is authenticity is the number one rule in social media, and that social media audiences are exceptional at sniffing out fakes. So don't disrespect your audience, be real. And maybe this is an example of that, her shtick is being cute and it is that anime character. And maybe this managed morph isn't considered authentic or cool to
it seems TikTok a bit of a persona. Departure.
Yeah, it is a departure. I think it's quite obvious. And, I kind of thought when I heard she was releasing a track that, it would imagine having that audience, global audience. But then there's some other people I discovered, and there's one guy who's a 19-year-old Toronto-born digital content creator or entrepreneur, Josh Richards, who's already amassed, I think, 25 million followers on TikTok, 7 million on Instagram, and about 2 million subscribers on YouTube. But he's founded Crosscheck Studios, a production company, with business partner Mike Gruen and former ICM agent Chris Ortell, in partnership with Mark Wahlberg's Unrealistic Ideas. And they formed a Gen Z marketing agency called Hawks with a Z. And so they started this Animal Capital, which is a $15 million venture capital firm focused on backing startups. And they've co-founded Caffeine Drinks and they're launching a podcast series. So it's kind of interesting how some of these TikTokers now and social media stars, if you want to call them that, are moving away. But it's obvious that, if you have the numbers, it doesn't actually mean success. Some of the other things that he explains in the book is that, the other sort of points is that you need passion and patience. And he kind of joins, it's a little bit dry, but look, it was filled with interesting anecdotes, and he manages to pull pieces of the social media puzzle together, which for me at least has given me some new ideas in exploitation.
What do you mean by that?
Just, you've got audiences and, you're sort of always trying to exploit them somehow, aren't you? You're pushing content onto them.
But it's interesting about that crossover from social media into more traditional mediums. And yeah, it's like sometimes it doesn't necessarily translate, or the audience, I don't know, are you reaching, I guess the good thing about social media is that you can suddenly, if you have a particular niche, you can suddenly reach that niche throughout the world and grow this huge audience. But does that work if you're trying to squish it into more of a mainstream platform.
But, also, are they loyal followers? I mean, you might like something and follow them.
Yeah, well, I can't tell you how many things I mindlessly follow, and then they appear on my feed, and I'm like, what is this? Where did this come from?
Who are you? But look, I think who was it? I think it was Warner Music Group in conjunction with somebody else have created a social media platform for their stars or the super performers in social media. And they break it down. It's kind of a bit vague in terms of their categorization, but, they've got people who cook. There's music, and then there's, performance or content or comedy. And it's very interesting that now they're recognizing that and creating these entities that dovetail into, so, they've got, I think, a relationship with a studio, and they've got a relationship with, Warner Music Group. So they can kind of take this brand and sort of push it out. But I don't know, I can't really recall. I did have a bit of a search, but I don't know how many of these really big social media stars have actually broken mainstream. Do you know of any?
Well, there's that TikToker Addison Rae was cast in a Netflix film, I think. That's just the first person that comes to mind if we talk about TikTok. I'm sure there are others. I mean, in Australia, there's people like, I'm having a mental blank, Kate McLennan and Kate McCartney. They started the catering show on YouTube, and that was picked up by ABC, the second season. And I think it also sold to the US, and that they're making a show for Amazon now. So there are examples of, I guess, just creating things for social media that then get picked up by more tradition. I think there's quite a lot of examples of that. There's also, I think the girls behind Broad City was the same thing. They started that as a web series, and then Amy Poehler saw it, and then she picked it up and it became a television show. There's other examples as well. Awkward Black Girl became Insecure on HBO. So, but those are sort of YouTube shows becoming television shows. But I don't know about personalities crossing over to become something else.
Have also become shows.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of examples of that. When will they make a TV show of us?
I don't know. Time's coming. So it was a really interesting, and I think if you're a content creator and marketing is part of that process, then it's probably a really good book. And he, has a bunch of other books where he talks about social media or sort of other aspects of social media and breaks it down. And he's interesting, and, it's a little bit dry, but worth a read. I was also watching a true crime documentary, The Raincoat Killer, which is a Korean documentary. I'm a big fan of Asian cinema, especially South Korean film. I don't know if you knew, but earlier this year, Netflix announced that it would spend $500 million on South Korean content. And they've done well. Korean film industry has done exceptionally well. Like, historically, The Parasite is an Academy Award Best Picture winner. Sweet Home has about 22 million households that tune into this horror series. And I'm waiting they're about to release a sci-fi series called The Silent Sea. And obviously, I think as part of that slate early this year, the funding of the $500 million, Squid Game has been a global phenomenon.
It's the most popular show on Netflix ever.
Incredible.
Yeah.
But they've been, there was the Host, Train to Busan, that zombie thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's they release like 500 films a year in Korea within their own domestic market, and they have like a box office share of like 50%. So they're very Korean, but yeah, now you're seeing it cross over to the rest of the world. And like K-dramas are huge as well.
K-pop. I mean, look, I think they've done exceptionally well. And, they started, I think Netflix, their first Korean production was the period zombie thriller series Kingdom. Have you watched that?
No.
You have to watch it. It's fantastic. It's a zombie film with a lot of twists. Production's amazing. I actually might get that back up, I think. Anyway, so they've done quite well. They've invested $500 million into the Korean film industry. However, every storm cloud has a silver lining, but perhaps in this instance, every silver lining has a storm cloud because Netflix are copping lots of flack from their subscribers asking why their subtitling is so shit. And I concur, it's not very good.
How do you know? You don't speak Korean.
No, but the subtitling, in terms of how it's placed and easy to read, it's so clunky. It's quite weird.
I don't know. Subtitles are not normally ever like if.
Well, then they're not good.
Yeah.
Not on Netflix. I think they need to focus on their subtitling.
I watch everything with subtitles on, almost.
So the Raincoat Killer is also part of that sort of original Netflix slate, I think. It's a true crimes documentary. It's a fascinating series, not only because of the subject and rawness of the subjects, but also because of the social commentary on the state of Korea. So, 97, the economy tanked before rebounding, and they kind of rebound with loans that largely benefited the rich. But in that process, they removed the safety net for the general public, and there was mass unemployment and homelessness and hopelessness. I actually did see some footage, and in this documentary, they show some of that footage, and there's people like in soup kitchens and living outdoors. It was horrific. And so it was out of that hopelessness and that kind of scene, out of that deep abyss, that this serial killer emerges. And it all begins with a triple murder of a grandmother, her son, and daughter-in-law inside a home located in one of Seoul's wealthy neighbourhoods. But almost before police could establish a motive, those murders were being connected to a similar case in another town. Anyway, there's more murders, they become more brazen, and suddenly they seem to lack any consistency with the previous killings. It was like there was no rhyme or reason for it. It's really interesting because the crew, you're taken on this journey, right? It's emotionally raw, and unlike most true crime documentaries I watch, you're there with the police, sharing their frustration and also sharing their fear that's gripping the city. And these guys are like really hardened. I don't know, it's just they're career police, and the personnel the police personnel that they interviewed, the Raincoat Killer, older now, in some cases even retired. But the brutality of this case has stayed with them. And there's little doubt that they've all been deeply affected by what they've witnessed. And there are some really moving moments in this, and a lot of humanity. And one of the scenes that really stands out for me is a forensic investigator attempts to lift prints. They find an area in this forest where all the victims have been buried, and they don't know who they are. And so she goes in to lift prints off the victims who are in advanced state of decomposition, desperately, just to be able to reunite the victims with their family. And it's just gut-wrenching. And this woman, just over and over and over, and she finally does it. She gets all the fingerprints, and those victims eventually reunited with their families and were able to be laid to rest. Fantastic. It's like, it's great. It had a lot of pace. It was kind of gritty. The characters are amazing. I have re-watched some of those episodes several times, partially because of the subtitling. But, in this, what was interesting also was that when Netflix announced this $500 million in investing in production in South Korea, they usually don't release the number of subscribers and territories, and they revealed that in Korea at the moment they currently have over 3.8 million subscribers, which is interesting. So obviously, the money's not in subscription dollars. It's more in the content and being able to stream that content globally. But look, I really, really rate it, and I think it's worth a watch. It's probably one of the best documentaries I've watched in a long time.
It's interesting because I guess one thing that's a theme in Parasite and in Squid Game is like this wealth discrepancy in Korea, and also but it sounds like almost that this documentary is sort of set within that. Well, it's exploring those issues as well, like
it's after that. So I think when the economy imploded, that was 97. The serial killer was 2003, 2004. But, and I did follow up and read some things about this period because I got quite interested. And I think that a lot of the businesses and also a lot of the wealth is held by families. So, yeah, it's not equally shared, and there is definitely a class issue, I think.
On a lighter note, I wanted to talk about a YouTube channel called Pasta Grannies. And in researching it for this podcast, I also found out there's a cookbook which I will subsequently be purchasing. But I love food and I love cooking. So, and I guess last year during lockdown, like everyone else in the world, I became obsessed with cooking really ornate dishes. And during that time, I followed a lot of different chefs on Instagram. But then I somehow stumbled across this one, which isn't chefs, but it is exactly what it sounds like. Italian grannies making pasta. And in each episode of this show, which is about 5 to 10 minutes long, we meet a different Italian nonna who teaches us how to make a traditional pasta dish from scratch. And I mean like by hand, rolling the dough out, creating the shells by hand. But not only does watching this show sort of inspire you to get in the kitchen, the women are inspiring as well. And I guess most are in their 90s, some are over 100, and they're like energetically kneading dough. And they're also, a lot of them are working from their own grandmother's recipes or recipes that are specific to their region of Italy. So they're recipes that are hundreds of years old, basically.
Are they from a particular region or they're just scattered from all over?
Well, it's this British woman who sort of travels around Italy. There's so many episodes, but yeah. So she wanted to document the tradition of making pasta by hand because it's disappearing in Italy. I mean, the videos are pretty lo-fi, but it is one of those things as well where I'm waiting for someone to pick this up as a real television show, because I think I would love it if they kept it as it is, if they kept this authentic feel. Because you could bring like a travel aspect into it as well. Like you could have every episode in a different region of Italy. Like I think it would be so interesting. But yeah, I guess like part of why this resonates with me as well, because my grandfather used to make pasta from scratch. Like my family isn't Italian, but my papa made friends with lots of Italian migrants in Melbourne in the 50s, and they taught him how to make pasta and sauce. And so he carried that on into our family.
And so do you have any of those secret recipes?
See, I think I was too young, and now I had never asked him for those before he died. But I think my cousins might know. But like, yeah, but watching Pasta Grannies, I sort of feel like he was cheating a bit because I always thought you needed a pasta machine. These grannies do everything by hand. But yeah, we used to make pasta a lot if it was at Christmas or if we all went away together as a big family. But I feel like there was a lot of red wine in the sauce, and I feel like there was a lot of red wine drunk in the process by the adults, because it was always like the kids like us who seem to have to carry these enormous sheets to hang them over the table to dry. But yeah, like this is also, I guess, one of those, I've become obsessed with a few different travel things during lockdown, and this was kind of one of them. Like I feel like I just want to go to Italy and escape my life.
My first girlfriend was Italian, and her father was like, he was a chef. He worked for, I think it was like some Italian leagues club, and he was known as the Sauce King. And he was Luigino was his name.
Luigi.
And I was so in love with him because we would make sauce. He'd buy all these tomatoes and it was all by hand. And I was more sad about leaving him than all that time. Because he was such a nice man. And, he even set up an external kitchen and, everything was by hand. And,
amazing.
He'd make his bottles of sauce and then bury them in the garden for a while.
What's the reasoning behind that?
I don't know. And he'd leave them there.
Because it's cool.
No, he'd do all the sauce, bottle it, and then in a big drum would boil the sauce in the bottles, and then would wait for it to cool, and then would bury it there for a while, and then clean the bottles and bring them inside. And the sauce was, dinner at their house was always to die for. Oh my God. I miss him so much. Yeah, so good Italian food. You can't beat it.
No, it's the best. And You know, nothing makes you feel better than carbohydrates and olive oil. So
Very true. Hey, I think we've run out of time again.
we have.
I will see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.
We're on the tools. All you need is headphones. Remote control. We're on